Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's the appointed time for the meeting to commence. And before opening the meeting, I need to give notice of meeting being recorded. Clause 91(4) of the Governance and Meeting Conduct Local Law provides the following. This public meeting is being recorded to improve access to the meeting for our community. The recording will be published and will be retained by Council in accordance with Council's legal obligations. As a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded. I'll now declare open this Council meeting on the 18th of July, and doing so I acknowledge the traditional owners. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. We pay our respects to their elders and to elders from other communities who may be here today. And the opening prayer. Almighty God, we humbly ask Thee to bless and guide this Council in its deliberations, so that we may truly preserve the welfare of the people whom we serve. Amen. Just for those members of the gallery who don't have a copy of the agenda, it will all be up on the screen for you to see. All councillors are present. Acceptance of apologies, so there aren't any, and there's no granting of leave of absence. No citizenship ceremony. Confirmation of the minutes of the 26th of June. I'd like someone to move those. 20th of June. Oh, and the 20th of June, I'm sorry. So there's two lots of minutes. The normal meeting and the special meeting. Move Councillor Rees, seconded Councillor Bussell. Is there any discussion? Declare the motion carried. Conflict of interest disclosure, and I wish to disclose a conflict in item 9.1, and also now we have a second petition, so 9.1a, both dealing with the RSL and the poker machines, and I have a direct conflict as I was on the board of directors, so I'm leaving the room and handing over to the deputy.
We have 9.1, which is the petition in relationship to the submission of particular RSL poker machines. That'll be Brendan. No, Ruth. Do we want to receive the other one, or just do well.
So I'll just speak, we have 3 petitions in the agenda and 1 received tonight. So I'll just speak a little bit generally about petitions. We have a governance and meeting conduct local law, which gives us the rules around how council deals with petitions. And unless we deal with the petition and the contents at the meeting, the only resolutions we can make are that the petition be received, that the petition be referred to the Chief Executive Officer for consideration and response, or that the petition be referred to the Chief Executive Officer for a report to a future council meeting. So now I will just deal with the actual petitions, and item 9.1 is a petition regarding RSL and the poker machines. A petition containing 137 signatures from community members has been received. The petition requests that elected representatives and council staff engage meaningfully with a wide range of stakeholders before making a decision on the permit. The attachment is provided confidentially. The recommendation is that the petition regarding the RSL poker machines be received, and that a report into investigations into the request within the petition be referred to the Chief Executive Officer for report to the August Ordinary Council meeting.
Thanks, Ruth. I have a motion for the recommendation or otherwise in relation to just 9.1, not 9.1A. So, moved Councillor Rees, seconder. Councillor Fuller. Anyone wish to discuss anything in relation to the recommendation that's moved? If not, the motion is carried. We now will deal with the petition, or the item that is the one we've received tonight is we've called 9.1A. I'll hand it back to, I think Brendan has got to read.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Mayor. We have had presented to us by members of the Wangaratta RSL sub-branch this evening a petition stating it holds 224 signatures supporting the petition. The petition reads, "Dear Mayor and Councillors of the rural city of Wangaratta, we, the undersigned, request that you support the Wangaratta RSL sub-branch's planning application to relocate to the Sydney Hotel, and note that we support the extra gaming machines that the RSL need to finance the project." It's the recommended course of action with this one is, assuming councillors are in agreement, is that you move a motion to have this sit on the table and come back to the August council meeting to be dealt with.
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A petition containing 284 signatures from Catherine Rogers has been received. The petition objects to the proposed removal of the performance platform within King George V Gardens and urges Council to encourage further use of the current platform by adding an unobtrusive shade panel. A copy of the letter is in our confidential attachments. The recommendation is that the petition regarding the removal of the performance platform in King George V Gardens be received, and that a report into investigations into the request within the petition be referred to the CEO for report to the August Ordinary Council meeting.
Move Councillor Angry, seconded Councillor Curry. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. 9.3.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A petition containing 209 signatures from citizens and 28 signatures from traders has been received from Sophie Lawback, North East Natural Health Centre. The petition requests councillors vote against the Maloney Square project. The recommendation is that the petition regarding the Maloney Square project be received and that the petition be referred to the CEO for report to the August council meeting.
Move Councillor Angry, seconded Councillor Bustle. Any discussion? I declare the motion carried. No deputations, presentation of reports, there's no council reports, copies of the report, item 13.1.
Item 13.1 is regarding Council's Register of Interests Returns policy. This policy is largely governed by legislation, in particular Section 81 of the Local Government Act, and it asks councillors and nominated officers of council to make declarations in regarding to particular interests that they have. Those disclosures include any offices that they hold, investments in land, shares and trusts and gifts and other matters. This assists council to establish conflicts of interests during decision making. The policy is a major council policy, and therefore, according to our major council policy local law, must be placed on public exhibition prior to its adoption. The recommendation is on page 15, and that is that council endorses the Register of Interests Returns policy for public exhibition, invites public submissions regarding the policy in accordance with the local law. If submissions are received under the local law, that we convene a special council meeting to hear from any person who wants to be heard in support of their written submission, and receives a report on the submissions to its September 2017 meeting. If there are no submissions received, the council resolves to adopt the Register of Interests Returns policy without further resolution. Thank you.
Any questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery. Someone moves the recommendation. Move Councillor Bussell. Councillor Benton. Councillor Bussell keeps looking at me. I'll second Councillor Bussell. Is there any discussion? The motion's carried. Moving on to 15, Infrastructure Services. Mr. Clark.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, this report on public toilet review, at the ordinary council meeting in May, it was resolved that council will undertake a review of public toilet facilities right across the rural city. That's now been done, and whilst it didn't bring up surprises to the officers, it does highlight many inconsistencies in the way we provide that service. Last year we conducted a building condition assessment of all buildings in the rural city, including the toilets, and it showed that the toilet facilities themselves, the buildings, were in fair to good condition, and it certainly highlighted we needed to do more. But over the years, standards have changed, particularly with all abilities, access, etc. And whilst we're not forced to upgrade toilets to those current day standards, if we were building new ones, we would have to build them to those standards. We want our toilets to be at their best, so one of the findings of this review is that we look to upgrade all of those toilet blocks. We believe an estimate of that work for the 35 blocks that we currently maintain clean is about $2.6 million. So it really highlights the need to develop a long-term strategic plan, prioritise list, costed, etc., to start doing this work in a logical fashion. So the recommendation today is that the council notes the public toilet review and develops a public toilet improvement action plan to formally implement the key directions identified in the public toilet review, and that action plan can then inform future budgets and inform our work plan to get these toilets up to scratch. Thank you.
Questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery? Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Bussell, Councillor Fuller. Any discussion? Councillor Bussell.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I would like to acknowledge the great work in a short period of time that Director Clark's team did on this review of all the public toilets. So, thank you.
Any other discussion? Councillor Curry.
I'd just like to say that out of that review that was done, there was a lot of inconsistency shown within the cleaning of the public toilets and so forth. And myself, I've received plenty of calls about different organisations requiring that their toilets be cleaned and other things such as that. I think it's only fair if the policy is developed, that it's being applied consistently across the whole council, and that moving forward, everything sort of comes back to that standard that needs to be addressed, and there's consistency. So when people call up and ask for these type of things, is that policy and clear policy is being used to give direction, and people exactly know where they stand. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? The motion's carried. Development Services, the draft Wangaratta Industrial Land Use.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report before Council tonight is for consideration to endorse the draft industrial land strategy that's been prepared by officers in conjunction with some specialist consultants who have been negotiating and consulting with a range of stakeholders over the last few months. This is about guiding our industrial land uses around the city, looking at the most appropriate zonings where we have currently only used one of the main zones out of the planning scheme. This is about looking at using the suite of zones that are available, including some overlays to designate where heavy industry should be, where lighter industry should occur, and try and limit some of the land use conflicts that occur with some of these sort of uses. The recommendation tonight is on the screen, and it is that the council endorses the strategy for community consultation.
Questions from the gallery? Mr. Parker, would you like to come to the... There's a little button in the middle there that you turn on, it'll turn the... You're on. Would you state your name and...
My name's Jeff Parker. I represent Australian Textile Mills, Wilson Fabrics and Australian Weaving Mills. Probably the question, I'll just preface the question if I may. We have a development which is designed to free up, to finance the condensing of machinery within what was a very large mill into a much smaller footprint. The intent that there'll be about 22,000 square metres of industrial building that will be available for rental. That building includes things like industrial servicing, in other words, pollution control equipment, air, gas, power, three-phase power and so on, air conditioning, everything that an industrial customer would need. And we found from our own experience in looking at developments here on industrial land, if you start from scratch with the land, then typically for a 500 to 1,000 metre building, you're going to need a rent of about $110 to $140 a square metre. Whereas recycled buildings like this could be rented with all the services for $20 to $30 a square metre with ease. So I suppose my question to the council is, does the council have a strategy, if you like, for recycling of buildings or assisting in the recycling of buildings?
Thanks, Jeff, for the question. Council doesn't have a designated policy in relation to recycling or repurposing of buildings. We are aware of a number of buildings that are around the municipality that are available, and we have a number of regular conversations with real estate agents who either have those particular buildings on their books or are aware of them. And also when we get approaches from outside interests that are looking for particular spaces, if we have a list of those sorts of spaces that are available, and a lot of them come to us with particular sort of criteria around open spaces, no sort of support structures in between. They want large span buildings. Others are simply just looking for the location and a space there. So happy to consider if you've got that sort of information about what are the spaces that are available or what are the spaces that could be made up. Certainly happy to consider those and pass them on to any particular expressions that we receive. Okay.
All right, I'll just make another comment because this was reported in the Border Mail yesterday. ATM is, it was given the article in the Border Mail gave the impression that the report said that textiles was going to be phased out in Wangaratta. That is definitely not the case. We'll typically employ between 150 and 250 people, and at this moment in time we've got a wage bill going forward of about 7.6 million. We put somewhere between 10 and 12 million into the local economy, including wages, and we're not going anywhere.
No.
So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? No other questions from the gallery? Someone like to move the recommendation?
I'll move.
Councillor Curry and Councillor Benton. Seconder. You wish to speak to the motion? Anyone wish to speak to the motion? I'll declare the motion carried. Advisory Committee reports.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As is always the case, we have some reports from advisory committees that have met during the preceding period. So we have some information from meetings of the Economic Development Tourism Advisory Committee, the Sport and Recreation Advisory Committee and our Agriculture and Agribusiness Advisory Committee, with the recommendation that Council notes those reports from those advisory committees.
Any questions from the gallery? Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Fuller, Councillor Bustle. Any discussion? I'll declare the motion carried. Records of Assembly of Councillors.
Thank you again, Mr Mayor. Similarly, each month we table a list of assemblies of councillors, and included in tonight's agendas are records of meetings that happened predominantly through June and July prior to tonight, with a recommendation that council receives the reports of assemblies of councillors.
Any questions from the gallery? Mr Nevin.
It's very brief. Gary Nevin, Bob Nawara. I've noticed in the last few months at assemblies of councillors, you record independent presenters and their names are given. Is there any reason why we can't be told what they are presenting about?
Thanks, Gary, for the question. I think the intent is to provide as much information as we need to comply with the legislation. The risk of trying to provide more than that may mean that we end up providing information we inadvertently shouldn't have. Notwithstanding that, I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't provide at least a brief description of the topic of whatever the presentation was about, unless it was a confidential matter that we shouldn't or couldn't disclose. So I think that should be achievable.
That's all I'm looking for. You know, what was the topic?
Yes.
Can I just comment that we would always have the topic in the list of items discussed. Might not necessarily match it with that group, so...
I think it's still important for us to know who might be talking to you about the sale yards or that.
Yes.
Or
you might be able to
C68.
work it out. Yep.
You shouldn't have to work it out. Thanks.
Any other questions from the gallery? Mr. Fox. This is on the reports of the councillors.
Oh, sorry.
It's not general business.
No. I just want to ask a question in public question time.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the gallery on the records of Assembly of Councillors? Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Fuller, Councillor Rees. Any discussion? I'll declare the motion carried. There's no notices of motion, there's no urgent business. Public question time. Now you can ask your question, Mr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, my question is simple but very important. I want to know whether it is still on the council's works agenda to put parallel parking in Oven Street near the King George Gardens. Can I have a yes or no?
Yes, it's still on the agenda to be considered. We'll bring back a summary of the results of the public consultation for council to consider and make some final decisions about various aspects of that project. So, yes, it's still on the agenda to consider. I won't pretend to imagine I can predict what the council's attitude to that particular element of it might be.
So I take from that, Mr Mayor, that no works will start unless it comes back to this council table.
No, it's out for public consultation at the moment.
Thank you.
Other questions from the gallery? Jim?
Incidentally, you've done very well. I remember once they finished by 6:30 and we suggested that they run the meeting again. See if you get the same answers. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Jim Lewis, Wangaratta. The industrial land strategy makes a number of references to solar power on both small and a large scale. You'll see in a moment why I put this question not adjacent to that strategy but separate from it. The public toilet review also uses the concept of solar generated power in discussion. So it's used twice, and so the only way to talk about it is now. No doubt there may be other items which also refer to it. Suppliers of photovoltaic equipment abound and seem to make up more than 90% of the entries and of the articles that you can find online. A few entries outline potential problems with PV use, and these include variation of voltage, because somehow or other you've got to get the electricity to go the wrong way. But that can be achieved provided we're prepared to have the appropriate technology. You can't just take the existing technology and do this on a grand scale. So there are two ways of doing it, it appears. One is to keep the sample small, and the other one is to change or update the equipment to cope with it. Does council have advice in the form of documentation before installing or approving large-scale arrays of PV cells? Does council recognise that a lot of houses will equate ultimately to one sale yard or whatever that you're dealing with? So you've got to look at them in both as single entities and as a collection. So is there recognition that many small installations that I've just said add up to a few big ones? There's a question. The previous question, does council have advice concerning how big an array you can have? And thirdly, is the restriction on the operation of the cogeneration at WISAC to avoid a technological problem, or is it simply to make payments for the supplier?
Harry?
I recognise that this is...
Probably costs us three. Do you want to deal with the solar panels?
Thanks, Jim, for the questions. I can probably deal with a couple of them in relation to the solar energy, and certainly we do have advice in relation to large scale, but also in terms of small scale as well, because it comes back to what's the ability of the networks to be actually taking that in. So even smaller business models, and we're working with a couple of businesses at the moment to look at their existing setups and some new setups around how the impacts can be mitigated in some respects with the return of the energy through the wiring. We're also working with the City of Wodonga and a number of other councils on further developing our ESD principles for insertion into the planning scheme, and we've actually received funding for that project. So that would give us some more policy documents around that. The couple of large sites that we have, certainly we have a lot of background, and where we do require independent assessment, we actually get independent assessment advice before any sort of large-scale systems are installed on council facilities. Alan might wish to take on the cogen.
Well, just briefly on the cogen, Alan, feel free to add. The basic premise of the cogen there for us is really about trying to reduce the reliance on electricity as the prime utility and shift the balance a bit to gas, which typically has been a cheaper source of energy than electricity has. So it's really about both an advantageous environmental outcome, but also trying to reduce the cost of actually heating air and water in that facility. We don't necessarily see it being restricted to cogeneration there, if that's the question. We've certainly identified that the roof space at Wysack and other places like the sale yards and indeed the council building here both potentially present good locations to be putting solar-powered electricity generation as well. And we've started some explorations at the sale yards and certainly intend to do similar explorations at Wysack and the roof space here.
Does that answer it, Jim, or?
I suppose I have never seen any documentation that's suggested for a project that there is going to have to be a test of the project against.
You hot?
Perhaps it's been going on, but we haven't seen it.
So with the cogen, there's a TV type screen up down at the Wysack, and it shows the savings on a as of right then basis. So it's showing the production that's occurring in that facility and the savings in real time. So for those who don't understand, the cogen is a natural gas powered turbine, and it's used to produce electricity, and the byproduct of that is heat, and the heat from the production is used to heat the pool water and also to heat the air within the pool complex. So and we end up saving a considerable amount of money, electricity, in doing so. So that's what it is, and the benefits of that are up on that screen constantly, and we can give you summaries. We can download reports for any period of time, but it's proven to be highly successful at the moment.
And is it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go on.
The feeling I had, this was that case when Mr. Floyd took us around the building, was that they had to set the system so that I think it was 54% of the night run was the maximum they could produce.
Yes, there was some sort of funny restriction on what savings we could make with contractual arrangements with electricity suppliers. So we had to. There was a cap on what we could actually save through that facility, and that was just a strange contractual arrangement going back many years. But that still goes on. Yes.
Thanks, Jim. Further questions from the gallery? Malcolm. Before you commence, is it about the sale yards?
No.
Okay.
My question's about the multi-deck car park. I'd like council to investigate how we can either get out of the contract of the ongoing debt that's going to be incurred by ratepayers, whether council can find another purpose for the building, or is it being satisfied used at the moment? I don't know. Given that ratepayers have to fork out an ongoing bill for another so many years, we either should have an inquiry into it to see that this situation doesn't happen again when council enter into a project like this. And also, given that the parking meters around Wangaratta had gone up, I think 50% in cost, which I think's not good. So that's my questions.
Through the chair, thanks Malcolm for the question. one of the things I'd say is that one of the topics that the new council's been very interested in is the question of parking, both paid parking around the city, the provision of amount of parking, our arrangement with the multi-deck car park owners. So we actually have a project in this financial year to do kind of a holistic review of parking, which will look at the issue of, you know, paid versus free parking. It'll look at whether there's appropriate amounts of various time limits of parking and whether they're in the right locations. So that's a piece of work that we'll do over the next few months, and it will come back through the normal council meeting cycle. In relation to the multi-deck car park itself, we do have a contractual arrangement with the owners of that facility. We don't have any scope to have any say about any future use of the building because it's privately owned by other people. But I think as we work our way through the review of parking, that might help inform the council on what their view about that arrangement might be in future years when we have the opportunity to renegotiate those terms.
Why do we need a review on parking when we've given it, say, 2 or 3 years now since it's been up and running, and we know where everyone parks? Why do we need a review on parking? Something needs to be done. I don't think the ratepayers should incur this debt ongoing either. You go to the state government and see whether the state government can get out of this contract, or you have an inquiry into why it happened, right, and what fault, who caused the situation, so that we don't have this problem again, where we're entered into some deal such as this. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's you know, it's out the window.
Yep.
I mean, you either have to find another use for it. Obviously, there's no one. Obviously, you should have some idea already of where all the parking is happening already in Wangaratta, given it's been 3 years since, or probably been more than 3 years since it's been finished.
Yeah, so we get lots of feedback every day virtually about parking, and the review is really about assessing whether we've got enough 1 hour parking, enough all day parking, whether that spread of 1 hour, 2 hour all day parks are, whether there's enough of them and whether they're in the right locations for people. So it's about making sure that there's appropriate mix of parking options for people, as opposed to, well, I'm not quite sure what your question was about that, but it's really about making sure that the parking provisions that we make as a council actually match what the community want and need in terms of having options for very short-term stays versus longer-term stays, and also an appropriate mix of paid parking and free parking so that they can make decisions about whether they want to use one or other of those. I can't see that the state government's going to have any interest in a contractual agreement that's between the council and the owners of that building. It's not for the state government to be making decisions about those arrangements.
They can overrule planning things, so the state government can overrule planning things that council put up and so forth. So surely they should have an overview of the situation. And the thing that probably hurts a lot of people. I'm not a business owner in Wangaratta, okay, but if I was a business owner and the parking meters are as they are now, right, I'd be concerned, because obviously you would go and park in a supermarket car park and do your shopping there. Because if you're putting a burden, you're putting a real, I think it's a real tragedy. The situation of the parking meters are so high, and you've tried the idea of that was to put them up so that people would park in the multi-deck car park, and obviously they're not. So it's a twofold thing. Anyway, that's it.
Malcolm, I think you've got to realise that the decision that was made in respect to the multi-deck car park was made by the previous council, not even the administrators. They had to wear it when they came into being, and one of the conditions that I can remember coming to the meetings was that we had to be in parallel with what they were charging, that was what the council agreed to. And we needed, or the council needed, to put their rates up to comprehend the rates that were being charged in the multi-deck car park. That's part of the contract.
So what I would do, I'd either find another use for the multi-deck car park, or get out of the contract, or do something else.
Well, we would need to find a lot of money to get out of it at this stage.
Well, the state government should...
The state government will not fund it. We had a 2-hour meeting with the Grants Commission yesterday, and they do not look at anything like that. And that's where we get our state government money from, is from the Grants Commission.
So you're saying that the ratepayers are going to continually burden, probably for the next 17 or 18 years, with an increase each year, and it's just a waste of money. It's just a waste of money.
Well, it's not a waste of money if people use the car park.
But they're not.
No.
So something has to be done.
They've already made some moves in the fact that you can now park all day in that multi-deck car park for $5.
Well,
there's a maximum charge now of $5 for a day.
I don't come into Wang that often, but I did look in the Chronicle and noticed that a lot of people were parking down around Wangaratta, down around other back blocks of the Wangaratta, so that they obviously don't have to pay. Maybe all the councillors should have to park there. Maybe you should make it that every council worker parks there.
My car's there right now.
Good. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? John?
John Griffiths from Woraley, to Mayor and the Council. My question is about pedestrian crossings, and to me, just a bit of background preface, that they're far more important than the issue of car parking. I did some counting on car parking. There's 550 off-street car parking spaces in Wangaratta. That's plenty. But my concern is that at the moment there are plans for both King George Gardens and also Maloney Arcade involving pedestrian crossings, and I believe that there is a misunderstanding of what actually the rules are. I've been almost knocked over twice by car drivers who don't know the regulations. I'm just wondering whether the councillors, do they know what the legal rules for pedestrian crossings? This is relevant because you're going to be looking at these in relation to those two projects.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. There's obviously various forms of pedestrian crossings, and the type of pedestrian crossing determines the rules. So there's pedestrian crossings that are fully controlled by lights that are on demand. So a red light comes onto the traffic. So that's the highest form. Other forms of the orange flashing lights and white lines, which commonly referred to as wombat crossings, which are very much like the ones in Wodonga has a lot of these days. They give a priority to pedestrians. And then there's some people call them Clayton's crossings, which merely provide pedestrian refuges but don't give priority to pedestrians. We're working with Vic Roads at the moment to seek approval for a number of pedestrian crossings. They look at things such as traffic count and vehicle count before deciding what sort of crossing is applicable to any given situation. So we don't necessarily get what we want in that regard. We have to go to Vic Roads for their approval, and they use those sort of statistics to decide which form is appropriate.
Yeah, that's what I understood probably what might be believed, but in fact looking at the regulations, Rule 81, Part 7 about giving way, and you've left out one very important pedestrian crossing, and that is at a place with white stripes on the road surface. I won't go into all the details. And I believe that this is where I've had an issue, that there are 3 of those. Do you know, understand? You know what I'm talking about? The white stripes, like zebra stripes, they are a pedestrian crossing, official, legal pedestrian crossing.
I think it has to be more than just the white lines, John. But go on.
I've got the actual rule here, Rule 81, Part 7, and there are, I counted, probably 3, could be 4 of these located in Wangaratta, going across areas where there's car parking, where cars are moving into car parking spaces at Safeway and in the post office, behind the post office and Big W. White stripe lines across the road. And they've been painted there. Do you believe they're not legal pedestrian crossings? Because that's what the law states.
But to start with, they have to be on a public road. So the Safeway area, it's not a public road, so it doesn't become a legal pedestrian crossing, I don't think, John. So there is a difference. And